I have always been fascinated by the horror aesthetic. To this day, horror games and horror films are the main art that I consume, and I can't really imagine that ever changing. A fascination with horror has always been with me for some reason. I distinctly remember my main horror obsession starting as a teenager when I finally worked up the courage to play the Resident Evil games, and it's basically been all downhill since. I had a teen horror phase, a gore flick phase, a cringy murder dolls phase. I've served my time, but the seeds of my love of horror were planted long before, when I was discovering video games. Obviously, as a 4-year-old, I wasn't playing Silent Hill or whatever. That would have been a terrible idea, but I did enjoy the mildly macabre stuff like Halloween TV specials and Courage the Cowardly Dog. Still my favourite cartoon ever. When it comes to games though, I think it all started on the PS1 when I first played Casper. A horror game, but for kids. Hey, I'm Heather, and welcome to Retro Relapse. Casper is a 1996 Metroidvania-esque game developed by fucking Interplay? Seriously? This was a year before Fallout, mind. Obviously this is a video game tie-in, or die-in, am I right, of the film of the same name, and released on the PlayStation, Sega Saturn and 3DO, with alternate versions being released for the Super Famicom, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, Windows PC, and your dad. Obviously, Casper has a far longer history than just this one 90s film, as the Casper character was featured in dozens of theatrical cartoons in the 40s and 50s, and famously featured in a shitload of comics as well as his own TV shows. He even met Lizzie McGuire that one time. This is Casper, the friendly ghost, and he's a big fucking deal. The game is more or less a straight adaptation of Casper's first feature-length film, simply titled Casper. The movie, from what I remember, is fairly unmemorable apart from the actually quite excellent set design. Seriously, if you ignore the weird CGI, it's actually a really pretty film. But still, it's a kids movie for kids. They'll like it, but it's not worth a rewatch. As a kid, I watched all the Casper feature-length films. I've always loved the concept of ghosts, even as a kid. That said, the films didn't leave much of an impression on me, and the general consensus is that the 1996 film was the best one, and even then, it wasn't all that great. The game, on the other hand, stands out to me. Not because it's good or anything though. You see, I stumbled across a speedrun of the game because it was 4 in the morning and I was on that part of YouTube, and it gave me nostalgia. So I went back and played it, and I felt the urge to put all of my current projects on hold and make a video on it. I probably could have held this off for a month and done it as a quick and dirty Halloween video, but I'm bad at this whole YouTube thing, so fuck it, we're starting October early. Welcome to Retro Relapse's Halloween Special. Or should I say, Heatherween? Yep, that's what we're going with. No, I'm not sorry. Casper makes a spooky first impression as it opens with a CGI cutscene as we zoom Sam Raimi style across at this spooky island and follow a car as it heads towards the spooky mansion. This sets the tone perfectly as a sort of mildly macabre kids game. There's no real horror here, it's just a suggestion of potential threat with nothing actually all that scary. From the main menu you get these fucking magical sound effects that I cannot praise enough. And the game starts with Casper, the titular dead child of this game, who haunts a big old mansion alongside his 3 also dead uncles. A paranormal psychologist and his daughter move into the mansion, and Casper decides he wants to make some new friends, and sets off on an adventure to give them the gift of old tatty found lying around the floors. In Casper, you play as a dead child, although a friendly dead child haunting a house. You need to wander around a labyrinthine, and I mean labyrinthine, mansion, hunting for keys, health items, puzzle pieces, as well as some weapons to help you fight the few boss battles. As you progress, you'll find item upgrades to help you access more areas of the mansion. More and more of the mansion becomes unlocked until eventually you unlock everywhere. Hidden items and areas are off the beaten path, and while not necessary for progression, will aid you in your journey. Did you catch it? Think of that description right there. If you remove the whole dead kid thing, do you think it could be applied to anything else? Another residence? Perhaps?
Watch out! It's a monster!
Let me take care of this.
Exactly. Casper on PS1 is a Metroidvania, and more specifically, Casper on PS1 is a survival horror game, but for kids. Think about it. You cut about a mansion running away from enemies, picking up healing items, puzzle pieces, and keys, trying your best to keep track of everywhere you've been and thinking, oh the fuck, where do I go now? You even start out in a mansion making occasional visits to a garden area, and even briefly visit an underground lab. Maybe I'm reaching on that last one, but this totally works, right? Right? Did you think the Devil May Cry video was going to be the last time I was going to call something a secret Resident Evil game? You are fucking wrong. Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves though, let's go over the aesthetic stuff first. For a PS1 game, Casper played it safe with pre-rendered backgrounds with some 3D elements. Where have I heard that before? Nope, wait. The audiovisual presentation is great. The graphics, while simplistic, also look excellent. As a general rule, PS1 games that use mostly 3D graphics haven't aged that well, while those that use pre-rendered backgrounds or 2D sprites have tended to age better on the whole. Casper might not look amazing, it's no Final Fantasy IX, but for a 1998 game, it looks totally fine. Much like the film, has a really nice graphical style to it. It's sort of mildly spooky stuff, being more Halloween haunted house than the likes of Fatal Frame or whatever, but this kinda macabre style really stood out to me as a kid, and I fell in love with it. There are so many nice graphical touches, like the chairs rocking all by themselves, or the paintings on the wall looking just a bit eerie. It looks like how I imagined Halloween as a kid. The sound design though is where the game shines. It mostly uses the score from the film, I think, which is nice. It's comforting background noise, even if it does get old after an hour or so. The tracks themselves are really short and loop constantly, so a few more tracks would have been greatly appreciated. Even when you hear new tracks, they tend to be different versions of the same Casper theme, so this is definitely a game I recommend you play with a podcast on, or a Retro Relapse video in the background. The other aspects of the audio design, however, are just great. Every sound effect is booming. The sound of gates opening or secret passages just creaking open, or even using an item feels great. It's all very loud and heavy sounding. It adds to this faux spooky, almost Halloween-like atmosphere. The soundscape feels empty a lot of the time before being penetrated by these punchy sound effects. And the narrator who reads the scrolls on the walls has such a great voice, and I could just listen to him read a phone book.
There is more to Whipstaff Manor than meets the eye.
Especially given the total absence of sound in these events, it low-key gives me Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast vibes. These sound effects, along with spooky rocking chairs, night statues, and a typical spooky environment, all made this a game that you may not have spooked me as a kid, but it definitely put me in that spooky mood. You'll explore a spooky mansion, a spooky hedge maze, some spooky attics, a spooky basement. And well, that's about it really. There isn't a great variety of environments, and the game is pretty short, clocking in at just a few hours, most of which for me getting lost like the dumb bitch that I am, but that's roughly the time it takes to beat a Resident Evil game. For a lightly spooky kids game, the atmosphere is great. And let's not forget that you're actually playing as a ghost, and it does feel like it. It's hard to describe, but moving Casper around, it doesn't feel like you're walking. It feels like you're floating. Well, I guess that's because you are floating because you're dead, or well, he's dead. And being dead, Casper has some tricks up his sleeve that help you navigate the environment. Throughout the game, you'll find jigsaw pieces that can be used to fill in paintings on the wall, and this rewards you with a power-up. Some of these power-ups are super useful, like the smoking ability, where you can turn himself into smoke and go through ventilation shafts around the mansion, transporting you to other rooms. Or the saw blade, which lets you smash through wooden boards blocking your path. Other power-ups, though, never quite felt as useful. A lot of them are just one-off items you need to use for one encounter or just to get into one room. And then there's the fan. He turns his head into a fan, and you can blow stuff. I had literally no idea what the fuck this was for, and I had to Google it. With an abundance of power-ups, this sounds like a fairly decent wee Metroidvania, and on the surface, yeah, but while the game might look and sound great, the same can't be said for pretty much anything else. For all the effort the team put into the audiovisual presentation, Casper on the PS1 just isn't that fun to play. While I may enjoy the core gameplay ideas of a survival horror Metroidvania, the areas in Casper are just too samey, too monotonous, and too labyrinthine for them to really work in this genre. Rooms may be well decorated, but there's only so many times you can see the exact same tile set before it all starts to look exactly the same. They all blend together in ways which honestly make it really hard to figure out where you're supposed to go, or where you even are in the first place. It's especially bad when you use the smoking ability to go through a vent and you find yourself somewhere completely new, and you really get turned around. In games like, yes, I'm going to say it, Resident Evil, every room looks unique. The room with the statue, for example, or the dining room, that sort of thing. Casper fails at this, and as a result, it's incredibly easy to get lost. The first hour or so is fine, but afterwards the game just opens up in so many different directions that it becomes too hard to keep track of where you are, where you've been, and where you're going. There's even a note on the wall that tells you to make a map. I mean, I could draw a map, Mr. Wall Scroll, or you could just give me a fucking map screen. I highly recommend playing this game with a map on your phone or something. It saved my ass so many times. There's a link in the description. Also, I need to get this off my chest. This fucking Tory of a note has the gall to tell me to make a map after I literally just went through a hedge maze. This seems like really important information to give the player much nearer the start, not halfway through Act 2. And Act 2 is when the game really starts taking the piss. You'll need to collect all the different painting pieces in Casper, but none of the pieces are labelled, and the mansion really does open up in so many different directions, it's surprisingly non-linear, but this leads to problems, especially with flipping switches. On more than one occasion I flipped a switch or solved a puzzle which opened up something, and I thought, okay, now what? Then I missed the area opened up, only to realise that this area is key to getting a piece that I need for the painting on the other side of the goddamn map. I spent a whole hour wandering around the mansion, ripping my hair out, not knowing where to go, only to realise that I missed one door. Sometimes you open a door and you find yourself in a barely traversable maze which ruins your life, and sometimes you find a door you hadn't previously opened only to be met with a boss battle with one of Casper's 3 uncles. I guess this is about as good a time as any to talk about the story in Casper, so skip to this point on screen to avoid any spoilers or whatever. I really don't know why that would be a big deal in this PS1 adaptation of a kids film, but you do you. So the game is split into 3 different acts. Act 1 involves you finding presents for Cat and her dad, which turns out to be a book you find on a shelf and a rose you found lying around in the garden. These alive humans are so enamored with these gifts that they stop being scared of the dead child throwing books at them and decide to help him rebuild the Lazarus machine, which is a machine that Casper's dad was working on in order to bring him back to life. But your dickhead uncles have stolen the Lazarus parts and you need to go beat them up to get all the pieces back. You do this by remurdering Casper's uncles in ways which range from spraying them with perfume to taking pictures of them in the shower to literally burying the fucker alive, or dead, I guess. And this is fine. It's okay. You just need to keep track of literally everywhere you've been, which is easier said than done without a map screen. It's so dull and repetitive. I can't even say it's awful because, like, it's not technically bad. Casper is a PS1 game that is made of a bunch of code that fits on a disc and works from the designated start to the designated end. Apart from whatever the fuck was going on with my capture card, but it looks like it's having fun, so I won't judge. It's so middle of the road. It feels like purgatory. You know, maybe that's the point. Maybe this mansion is just what exists between heaven and hell, as this game exists between good and bad. Casper has an overall very negative opinion on the afterlife. I mean, the entire game is about wanting to become human again. I thought the afterlife was supposed to be peaceful. I thought Casper was supposed to get rest once he's dead. But maybe there is no rest. Even after being freed from his mortal skin prison, the afterlife is so bad that he still longs for the pleasures and pains of the flesh. I mean, can you imagine being Casper? It would suck. He's a dead child that has to spend eternity with his abusive uncles. Those paternal figures that were sources of horrific suffering in your real life are still there in the afterlife, haunting you forever. There is no escape. There is only the mansion. There is only the never-ending hedge maze of death. Well, that's about as far as I'm willing to take that joke. Where was I? Oh yeah, I eventually got bored of looking around for that one door and that one vent that I missed, or filling out another painting. It's too easy to get lost in Casper, it's too easy to miss one puzzle piece, too easy to not know where you're supposed to be going. And by 1998, there were so many games doing this so much better. It just got boring. Thankfully, the game's final act is so short that it's almost comically timed. After getting the Lazarus part, you have a boss fight with the big bad, and how do you beat the final boss? Well, do you use a wider range of power-ups that you've collected over the game so far, testing your skills you've learned along the way? Do you fuck? You grab a key, use it on a chest, and then the big bad dies. Flesh prism restored, game over. So yeah, Casper isn't very good. You can say that about a lot or most movie adaptations. Nobody expects a movie tie-in game to set the world on fire, but I do admire this game in a weird way. I mean, think of how easy it would have been for the team to think, hey, let's just make it a 2D platformer or something like that. The idea of making a movie tie-in game that's also a Metroidvania is kind of interesting. There are a lot of movie tie-in games, or should I say, wait, no, I've already made that, on the PS1, and for the most part, they all kind of play similarly. You have your 2D platformers like Hercules and Tarzan, you have your 3D platformers like A Bug's Life or the excellent Toy Story 2, and then there's Casper, which is a weird Metroidvania focused on exploration. It's a novelty, but that's all it is. Casper was an interesting playthrough from a historical standpoint, and they clearly put a lot of thought into the aesthetics. But at the end of the day, Casper is just another movie tie-in game on the PS1, and even on the PS1, all of those Disney games that played it safe were miles ahead of Casper. So, should you play Casper? Probably not, but I more wanted to talk about my experience with it. As a kid, this might have actually been my first exposure to this kind of gameplay and the horror genre in general. I loved this game when I was young. I found it gripping, if a little disorientating. I loved the spooky scenery, I loved the sound. The more I look at it, the more I see that this game really did lay the foundation for my love of survival horror and Metroidvania. And I think that's interesting to think about. I grew up to love horror, and I grew up to love Metroidvanias. If I had to pinpoint a game that kickstarted that, it's probably Casper. So, my childhood sucked, that's for sure. But it's only September, and I'm kind of feeling the Heatherween vibe right now. So, next time we're going to be taking a look at quite possibly the most Halloween-y PS1 game out there, Medieval. Hopefully that game won't have any mazes for me to get lost in. Oh, for fuck's sake. Hey, thanks so much for watching. This has been the first of my Halloween videos, or Heatherween videos, am I right? If you want to see more, be sure to click subscribe, leave a comment with your first ever Halloween game, and follow me on Twitter and Twitch at Vance Ferdinand. I'm Heather, and I'll catch you guys later.